lecture is based upon. Carlton, maybe. As a matter of fact, I'll mention him several times tonight during my talk. He's not there now. Okay. Carlton. Carlton was the one who actually, he was the church historian before me, and he had kind of taken me in when I came to this area. I told him I was a historian. He drove me around, showed me a lot of historical sites. He had worked on Sojourner Truth. He wrote a book about her. He drove me around and showed me all the Sojourner Truth sites, took me to the courthouse where she argued for her son's freedom. Just kind of got me interested in the local history around. And he knew that I had not written or published anything for quite some time, and he started encouraging me to write. And I started thinking, well, maybe I'll do some local history. Maybe I'll write a history of this church. And he would prompt me occasionally and say, Anna, how's that book coming along? And so he's largely responsible for what I ended up doing here. I succeeded Carlton as the church historian. Big shoes to fill, definitely, but I was very excited about the work. I wrote a proposal for a sabbatical from Empire State College, where I work, and the proposal was turned down initially because it was church-related work. This is not scholarship. It's not appropriate for scholarly funding. We worry a lot about funding. So I told Carlton about that. It was the last long conversation I had with him. We have a giving fair prior to Christmas every year, and at the last alternative giving fair, I sat with Carlton, and I said, Carlton, I'm really sorry. I said, they turned down my proposal. You know, I'll try again some other time. He put his fork down hard. He looked at me and he said, you go tell them to reverse that decision. You talk to them. And he, at that point in his life, didn't get excited and emphatic very often, but he did with me then. I went back and rewrote that proposal, and it was too late to get a full sabbatical, but I got a reassignment, a mini sabbatical, as it were. And I came here from August until, from midsummer until October. Every Wednesday I came to this church and I started going through boxes of documents. I was appalled. I'm sorry, there's no other word. I was appalled at what I found. I found boxes shoved in the attic with books from the 19th century, handwritten material, attendance records, letters, marriages, all kinds of things, just shoved into boxes. Well, I started unpacking the boxes as carefully as I could and looking for things that really were interesting. And I found this little notebook. I picked it up and it said the Home Child Fellowship Club. Okay, I had never heard of such a thing. So I opened it, and I want everybody here to plow past that case tonight. It is a beautiful little composition book in cursive handwriting, meticulous minutes of every single meeting this club had. They were in existence for 4 years, and that's the topic of my lecture tonight. I felt that I had found a handful of jewels, and I still think so. I'm going to write a scholarly article about the Home Child Club, and let me tell you. In their own words, a group of 12. I think that's so appropriate for a church club, a group of 12. Met at the Methodist Parsonage on January 29th for the purpose of forming an organization for girls. So I denote a bit of attitude even in this opening line. There was already a young men's Bible study class. Now, these girls, we would now call them young women, were all students at the normal school. They were training to be teachers. So we have intelligent young women who are coming and worshiping at this church while they're going to the normal school, and they come to the parsonage with the intention of starting an organization for girls. They decided on their own to name their club the Holmeshaw Fellowship Club. Holmeshaw, the Reverend Holmeshaw, was a former pastor of the church. He had been a pastor who was one of the movers and shakers responsible for getting the building that we are in built up and running. A little bit of history here. I am, after all, a historian. A little bit of history here. There was at that time a very close connection between the normal school and the church, this church in particular. And as a matter of fact, one of the reasons why we have this building is because of that connection. Now, when people, I didn't realize that the people at this lecture were all going to be people that I know by first name. I had prepared to do a little bit more talk, but some of you already know these things. When the Methodists decide to build a church, they don't just up one day and get some money together and go and build a church. We're part of a larger body, and there's a negotiation involved. And some of the appeals to build this building mention specifically the normal school, because we were in a building that's still around. I have yet to visit it, over on Church Street, a small building that had been there since 1840, and there were complaints. The normal school was taking off. It was really getting wings. The normal school was becoming it was very soon to become a four-year school. We were training young women to be teachers from all over the state of New York. The railroad had come through here, and it was convenient for people to come to go to school at New Paltz. So all these young women were coming to New Paltz to train to be teachers. They needed a place to worship. It was not like college these days. These young women went to church, and the parents who sent these young ladies away from home to college expected that their daughters would be in church on Sunday and active in church. That was an important consideration. So people from this church who saw the need for a new building were writing appeals saying, the building that we're in is the least appealing in all of New Paltz. It smells bad. It was near a livery stable, and during the summer it had flies. So they did eventually say, all right, build the new church, and there were some wonderful architectural plans for a grand stone building, beautiful architecture that would have been very, very expensive. Well, that didn't come to pass. We ended up with a far more modest building, the one that we have, and I love this building. I think it's a good thing that it worked out the way that it did. And even better, this was 1929. Everybody here knows enough history to know what happened in 1929. There was a stock market crash followed by a Great Depression. Nobody had money. Everybody was struggling, and we had this church a mortgage to pay off, a sizable one that this church struggled with for several years, and that's a different lecture. But we built the building, and the young women from the normal school came. And it was these young women from the normal school coming here who had known, maybe some of them, their parents had known and had heard about the Reverend Holmeshaw. And so they decided to call their club the Holmeshaw Fellowship Club in memory of this beloved pastor. So I love their initiative. They decided there would be 2 meetings each month, the second and fourth Mondays. One week would be a study meeting. These were college students, and they were academically curious, very energetic young women. One meeting would be a study meeting, the other one would be a supper meeting. And they carried out this format pretty much that way for the 4 years that they were around. Just some examples of the kinds of things they did at their study meetings. They had poetry readings. They would decide to bring in, each bring in a religious poem, and then they would have discussions about the poems. Sometimes I would have in the secretary's book names of the topics, the articles, the poems, and so on. Sometimes they just said poetry. The Reverend Matterstock, this was the pastor at the church in 1934 when the club started, was also very involved with the club. As nearly as I can tell, the pastor of the church always attended the meetings. And they had sponsors also from the church. Some of them are named in the secretary's book and some are not. But they had a good deal of support from the church, and the pastor always came to the meetings. They had a talk on John Greenleaf Whittier. The pastor read poems by an African-American poet. I actually looked him up, Paul Dunbar, a remarkable African-American poet. And he invited the superintendent of Sunday schools from the Kingston district to come and talk to the girls, the young women, one night. Talk about personality and how to develop and master it. I love the level of detail in this book. That's why this is a real find. I write social history, the lives and interests of people, not just kings and presidents. And this is wonderful. This is telling me something about what these young women were interested in, what their social lives were like, what they cared about, what they liked to do. Also, on February 25th, 1935, you can see one of the joys of being a historian is trying to read cursive handwriting in old books. Sometimes it's very easy and sometimes it's really hard. So I do not know who Mr. Follett or Lillette was. He gave an illustrated lecture on Indians in the Southwest. And with a note afterwards, this was one of the most interesting, most enjoyable meetings of the year. So that must have been quite a lesson. We had the head of the religion department at Vassar College come in and lecture on early beginnings of Buddhist art in China, Japan, and India. We're talking about 18 to 21-year-olds in 1934 and 35. They were interested in these things. They invited these people to come and speak at their club. I'm amazed. Now, the pastor changed, as sometimes happens in Methodist churches, and the Reverend Mr. Coons was the pastor after the Reverend Matterstock. And something changed. There was no discussion of it in the secretary's book, but there was some kind of shift. The pastor started doing most of the presentations at the meetings. I don't know if it was just getting difficult to find people to come, or if this was his decision or their decision. I really don't know. But the pastor started doing most of the presentations. Now, I had a lot of fun with this. He discussed the relation of science to religion. This was something they cared very much about. They talked about Thanksgiving traditions. Then I started to find little bits of attitude. He gives a delightful and worthwhile talk about Boniface. Okay. Nice. He was, I'm assuming this is the Boniface that's Saint Boniface, who was a medieval saint. I am assuming that is the Boniface this is about. Actually, if you Google Boniface, you get several hits. So I'm assuming that that's what that is. I'm presenting it just as they said it, and yes, there's more work to be done, and yes, I'm working on it. In January 37, Reverend Coons lectured and showed slides. Now, this is 1937. That's quite an accomplishment in 1937. Showed slides about the recent archaeological discoveries in the Holy Land. Now, I have the pleasure and privilege of being friends with a historian and archaeologist, Susan Hollis. She came here and did a talk a couple of years ago. She's a good friend of mine, so I called her up and said, hey, Susan, archaeological discoveries in the 1930s that would have been a topic of discussion at our church. And she said, well, there were several things. This is before the Dead Sea Scrolls. This was the early 1930s. She says the big talk in the early 1930s was the discovery, the unearthing of Jericho. And sure enough, I went back in some of the newspapers. I'm not going to try to scramble through my papers here and find, but there were some people who had unearthed what they thought was the tower at Jericho. And there were a lot of articles in the paper of churches, fundamentalists arguing back and forth about what the ultimate fate of Jericho was. Was it a natural disaster, as these archaeologists had suggested, or was it just like it said in the Old Testament, they marched around those walls and they came tumbling down? I don't know. But that might very well have been what they were talking about. This is something that there would have been pictures and slides available of, and something that certainly would have been appropriate and interesting to people who had a church-related club. So I'm suspecting that is probably what that was about. Then they start, the notes about Reverend Coon's talks get kind of curt, short. He gave an interesting talk on superstitions. That's pretty much all they said about that one. Then he talked about when the world seems to go to pieces, and they decided that they as teachers could help by, as they put it, establishing seeds of progress when working with children. So they're starting to talk back to the Reverend just a little bit here. What happens later. Okay. Enjoyed a talk on brotherhood. Now, this could just be the way the particular secretary was writing at the time. I'm not quite sure what she meant. We enjoyed a talk based on brotherhood, which was given by, now it's Mr. Coons. The members also discussed situations which developed from his talk. Okay. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall for that meeting. Then we had one of their members, I believe this was one of their members, although she's not in the membership list, I'm not really sure who Miss Muffley was, but showed pictures of a visit to Germany. Interesting questions concerning the pictures were answered by Ms. Muffley. Now, December 13th, 1937. That might have been a very, very, very interesting presentation and discussion, because you know what was happening in Germany during 1937. This was the rise of Hitler and all of that. This is before we were involved in World War II, certainly. But a talk about a visit to Germany, that certainly could have been a very, very interesting meeting. Now, the next one, I just love this one. Mr. Coons, by this time, he's just Mr. Coons. I couldn't find a picture of him, and I think I know why. Mr. Coons' topic was entitled, Human Nature Can't Be Changed. We, the club members, pointed out the fact that as teachers, we can help change human nature with our teaching. He melted into a puddle and slid out the door, and that's why I don't have his picture. And he talked about other things. He talked about Ecclesiastes and the Ten Commandments, and Mr. Coons' topic. I just love it. It started out as the Reverend Coons, then it was the Reverend Mr. Coons, and by the time it was over, it was just Mr. Coons. This topic was about Jonah, whom he said was the most misunderstood person in the Bible today. So we know what their academic is. Now, let's talk about their social interests. Twice a month, or once a month, they had 2 meetings per month. Once a month, they had supper. I'm going to try really hard to dig through those boxes and the archives of our recipe books and find out what these girls might have been preparing for these suppers, because sometimes they were quite elaborate, and I even found most of their meetings were in the local newspapers. There's some little some reference to them. They always said they had a delightful supper. But the newspaper here, I got on their first week, the Homshaw Fellowship Club held a social meeting in the Methodist Church on Monday evening, February 5th, for the members, after a substantial supper. So they always said it was a delightful supper, but the paper says substantial. I have to wonder what they were up to. February 5th, that would have been 1934.
Just wondering how it came in the sequence of months of the year. February 5th?
Yeah, this was February. February 5th. Supper meetings They were either held in the church or the parsonage. If they were held in the church, the young women prepared dinner themselves. They would have notes in the meeting before, and they would assign a committee, and they would assign a committee to clean up, and they would come in and prepare the supper and take care of themselves. Sometimes the pastor or the pastor's family would prepare supper for them at the parsonage. I think there were 2 or 3 times when that happened, depending on the event. Suppers were always delightful. I want to know what they served. They also had some picnics. We know they had hot dogs at the picnics. I just love some of the comments. As I was doing this work, I was falling in love with these young women, and seeing their pictures, I'm sure that I will never forget any of them. See, history is interesting. It's fascinating. There's no telling who you'll meet. Learn all kinds of stuff. Comments about the April 8th, 1934 supper. A broken sherbet cup was the only disaster. I wish my life were so simple. June 4th, this was the last meeting of the academic year. They only met during the school year. They would start up in September, sometimes early October, depending on the year, and then they would go until the end of school. And I was just touched by their comments. So supper was served, after which there was a general good time in the kitchen. Is that our church? I think that's our church. See, that's why this is good stuff. This is our history. These are our traditions. That's why this history needs to be written. We celebrated especially as 3 of our members graduate and will not be with us next year. After much hilarity and weeping, we did adios. I love that. The tables were decorated in the spirit of Valentine's Day. By candlelight, we ate Turkish food with spoons in accordance with a Turkish custom. Very good. And for Thanksgiving, they served, the room was decorated in Thanksgiving fashion, and supper was also in keeping with the season. Well, doggone it, couldn't you say we served turkey or something? They didn't give me any more clues, just that it was in keeping with the season. Finally, they mentioned food, a picnic meeting. A picnic supper consisting of hot dogs and rolls, salad and coffee was enjoyed by everyone. We roasted our hot dogs and marshmallows over a fire made in the fireplace of the cabin. There are several references to a cabin at Mohawk. I do not know which cabin or exactly where it was, but there are at least 3 meetings that took place at a cabin at Mohawk. And they made toasted marshmallows. Ah, yes. They didn't just eat and read interesting articles and have interesting discussions. They also loved music, and we had some talent in that club. They were a little bit more careful about listing what they did at these musical meetings than they were what they ate at the supper meetings. As a matter of fact, the first one was arranged in 1935 by Reverend Hatterstock. A trumpet solo by Elaine Niffen. She is one of the people on the board. When you go back, when you leave here, go by and take a look at the book, first of all, and take a look at the pictures as well of these young women. A trumpet solo. Now, that's interesting to me. She does not say cornet. I want to know. I'm trying to imagine a trumpet solo in this building. I mean, that must have been pretty remarkable.
We've had that.
We have?
Yes.
Okay.
Other names, Ruby and Ruby.
Okay. Thank you for speaking up. You gave me a chance to get a drink. I appreciate it. No, that was interesting to me, and just looking at the selections, this gives us a little insight to their world at the time. I don't know all of these songs. Old folks at home, unfortunately, yes, I do remember that from my childhood. Temporary.
Yes.
I can imagine a trumpet solo of Temporary. That would have been rousing. Then they had some readings, and let's see, The Minister's Blunder by Mark Twain. I'm actually familiar with that, and George Washington. Violin solos now, this was Perry Burago. I don't know, this was probably one of the guys from the men's Bible class. I don't know.
So here's a question or comment. If it is a name that we know as members of the congregation, Virago, Perry Virago, I wonder if they are related.
Probably.
And what's another one? I just can't read it very well.
Jay Mauerstock?
Okay, I don't know that name, but just to say that
Pastor's
loud.
daughter.
Who's?
Pastor's daughter.
She was
Reverend
Reverend
Jane.
Mauerstock's daughter.
Okay, okay.
And violin solos. So interesting. And then more music. This was almost a year later, April 1935. More entertainment. Elaine Niffen is also there. A solo by Mrs. Keelan. Not clear what kind. I don't know if this was if she was singing or playing. I don't know. But you can see just some of the selections. Carry Me Back to Old Virginia, yes, that was one. And Mr. Moody joined in the chorus. I don't know who Mr. Moody was, but that's, then solos by Reverend Mauerstock, and accompanied by Blanche Golnack, Beautiful Garden of Prayer. That must have been lovely. And music. Besides these grand recitals that they had, they did have a lot of, they mentioned in almost every meeting, they would start out the meeting by singing hymns, singing a hymn or several hymns, and sometimes they would sing other songs as well, so they were fond of singing. We closed by singing Christmas carols once in English, German, and Latin. This was in 1936. I thought that was interesting. And after another one of those delightful suppers, they joined in singing rounds led by Mrs. Kevin. Now, singing rounds, yes, I was a Girl Scout. I remember singing rounds. I know what that is and how it works. I'll tell you that the young women who are at Cindy New Paltz now do not sit around and sing rounds on Friday night. Monday night, or any other night of the week. As a matter of fact, I think this is dance night or something like that at Joe's, and if you haven't been over to Joe's, you should go. You'll get quite an education. I actually went to Joe's one night because my secretary did me a big favor. Secretaries are wonderful. She cleaned up a mess that I caused like it never even happened. And her birthday was coming up, and I said, I'll take you anywhere you want to go. I thought you'd want to go to Applebee's. So we went to Joe's. Joe's, and I got quite an education about what college kids do. They don't sit and sing rounds. So anyway.
Probably can't put it all in your book.
No, I don't think so. Games. Now, they mentioned many times playing games. And a lot of times the business meeting would end or the delightful supper would end, and they would spend the rest of the evening playing games. But it wasn't until 1938 that I started, well, 1938, yes, finally a list of games. We enjoyed playing geography, dropping clothespins in a milk bottle, and identifying Irish songs which were played on the piano by Helen Ingalls. At one of their picnic meetings at the cabin, they especially enjoyed throwing the beanbag. Okay. Then, at their final meeting, the last entry in the book before they passed into history in 1938, the games Sardines, Red Light, and Giant Steps were enjoyed by all from the cabin. I don't need to embellish that one. They struggled at first coming up with a way to pay their bills, and they tried a silver tea, but in 1935 they decided to try to earn some money through the sale of candy in the different houses. These are the houses on campus. Elizabeth Hasbrook was appointed to order and distribute the candy. Now, I don't know where they were getting this candy. I'm going to try to find out. I'm going to try to figure it out. That's right. But every meeting I'm hearing about how much candy they're selling, it caught on like wildfire. They were coming back and saying, we need to order more candy. We sold all we had. And a very touching entry in the book once was, They sold so much candy, they were able to pay all their bills and give $11 to the church budget. Now, this is at a time when the church is really struggling to pay its bills. We almost lost this building several times. And there was constant talk about how much people needed to contribute, and come on, we need some more, we've got to pay off this mortgage. And they were so proud to give $11 to the church from selling candy. We discussed ways and means of raising money. This is the next year in 1936. Candy selling was suggested. Candy selling in normal school basketball games was also suggested, and selling candy again in the houses. And in February of 36, the Candy Committee reported that the candy was being sold rapidly, and the club has permission to sell candy at the high school basketball games for the rest of the season. They gave $11, 10 of which went to the church budget. They passed into history in 1938. I do not know why the club was disbanded. They had elected officers for the upcoming year. And they had made plans for, they hadn't set a date yet, but they had made plans for a meeting for the next school year. This was in 1938, for the September 1938 school term. And they disappeared. There are no more entries in the book. There are, however, some lists, some membership lists at the end of the book. Some of these, I have pictures. We have found pictures of here in the back. I have not seen the pictures until today. Barnett is one of the people responsible, and also Linda Miller, who copied them. And I'm going to get those digital copies to incorporate into my article that I'm going to be writing about this book. So in 1938, for reasons unknown to me, the Halmshaw Fellowship Club passed into history. But they were amazing, young Methodist women, energetic, bright. I can't say enough good things about them. And it gives us a window into their lives. And I'm so glad they took all these meticulous notes. That's the end of my talk. Thank you. There was, and I don't know, it might be that, and I've forgotten the name of the incoming pastor, we've got him on the wall back there. It might be that the incoming pastor couldn't do the meetings every time, and I don't know what happened. There's no, I'm going to have to look at other documents from that time at the church and hope that I can find a reference to what happened to the Halmshaw Club. Yes.
There is a historian of the archives at Norwalk. I forgot her last name, but her name is Nell. She's going to be able to help you find that cabin.
Oh, okay. Okay.
She got divorced in the middle, so I don't know.
Okay. But I can track that one. Yeah, I'm thinking, but even if it's gone, somebody might know. I mean, there must be some, I mean, the Mohawk, there must be an architectural history. Someone somewhere must know what happened. Yes, Karen?
There's just the Mohawk Arch.
Yes.
I wonder if that's the gateway.
I'm thinking that. I'm thinking that. Yes.
When was that built? And that's not that old structure, so there may have been some wooden structure there.
It could have been.
That was superseded by the stone arch gateway.
Of these 12 members, and it might fluctuate,
Oh.
change, but how many people were members of the church? What's the percentage of these 12 were?
I don't have a complete answer for you. I know that I was able to figure out that about half the members of the club were members of the church, and apparently they all came here to worship. A lot of them were from other towns. You know, they were in town to go for school, so a lot of them were from neighboring towns, and they just went to church here. I'm gonna have to, I have not been able to compare all of the lists of names to membership. I have, I know that we have membership lists for 2 years. There were more than 12 members in the club. I mean, there's 21 that we know of. And probably the last 2 years when I don't really have membership lists, there could have been as many as 40. I know that as many as 40 came to one of the meetings because they talked about one of the parties that they had for incoming freshmen. They said more than 40 people were there.
And although not everyone was a member of the church.
Correct.
And the church as a whole, you know, again, were there 300 people coming to church or the, you know, on a Sunday?
I have not figured that out yet.
Yeah.
But I'm writing the social history of the church, so that is stuff that I'm going to be looking
Just a
at.
comparison how they're.
And, yes, Marnette.
Well, in 1938, the world was very grim, you know, so also that might have impacted, it was before people were being drafted, but I mean, people were knowing that the war was coming. So just in the overall way, there was a kind of change.
And I would also want to look then on that note and see if that was impacting enrollment at the normal school. It might have been.
What was their club's connection with the college?
So it was students.
I know there were students.
Yeah, right. I have not been able, I have put out calls to the alumni office and no one from there has gotten back to me. Marnette may know more because she has actually been over and looked.
Yeah, the religious, and I think this is correct, because that's a state-sponsored school, none of the religious groups are listed as part of the yearbook. And that is, in my opinion, you know, separating church and state.
Right.
But they probably did, and they didn't meet on campus, so they did not have to fill out forms to be recognized in that way. But I think it'd be worth checking with alumni records and seeing what's going on.
And I know that these young women's families were very proud of their involvement here. Almost all of these women are mentioned in some way or another in the newspaper. You couldn't leave town and visit somebody without it being in the paper at this time in history. But I found June 19th in 1936, Miss Thelma Diedrich. She was the secretary of the club and wrote the first part of the book that I found. Miss Thelma Diedrich, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Louis Diedrich, Fulton Street, graduated yesterday from New Paltz Normal School. The graduation was outstanding this year. The school celebrating its 50th anniversary. Miss Diedrich, and I love this, Miss Diedrich was a member of the Kindergarten Primary Club, Outing Club, Country Life Club, Hong Shaw Fellowship Club, Co-Ivan Zah, and a staff member of the weekly newspaper and played on the basketball and soccer teams. And Thelma Diedrich, she is bottom row of the pictures there. I had not seen her face before I came to this meeting, but a very beautiful and determined young woman. Yes.
So from the 1934 New York Annual Conference Journal, we learned that we were part of the Newburgh District. Our statistics were that we had 235 members. On books, no baptisms were listed that year for adults. 1 child was baptized. There were 2 Sunday school classes, 22 officers and teachers, and 195 scholars. So 195 people registered in the Sunday school. In those 2 classes. Wow. So that's where we were in 1934. 1935, we've gone down to 169 scholars. So people stopped studying.
Any other questions?
I think you need to check with the university or beyond New Paltz and see if there was some connection, some cause for these women to not meet again, seeing how they anticipated meeting, because you said they elected
They had
officers.
elected officers for the upcoming year.
Something that sounds like a banishment or you can't do this anymore.
I know.
Which may have come down not from the church, but from the
From the college.
well, maybe not even a local college, but something from a university. We weren't a university at that time, we were just
They weren't even meeting with
a
the
normal
college
school.
or having anything to do with
They were
college.
selling candy over there, and it was a lot.
Wow.
Well, yeah, but they still, yeah, but the important thing is, Marnette, they were students.
Yeah.
And if they were students, they were under the control of a dean.
Well, we'll see what Anna digs up for us.
Just keep going, Dan, keep going.
Well, Alfred Coombs finished, he was appointed here through 38, and then there was a new pastor. And that would be my immediate guess. Change of pastor, it may have been somebody who just set unrealistic rules. Not necessarily even stopped it, but I have been in churches where the pastor says, so in order for you to continue as a group, you have to change your name, you have to become this, you have to follow these rules. There was a covenant group in one church that a pastor wanted to turn into a UMW, and the group dissolved, rather than become what they were not there for.
The conference record should show who the new pastor was.
It appears to be a fellow named Bostock,
Okay.
Elmer Bostock.
You can give it the S. Bosca.
Bostock. He was appointed 39.
Maybe they morphed into a UMW. I don't know when that began here.
Or it was, whatever it was called before he
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
What's it
Yeah.
called?
Right.
And they graduated enough people that they lost their support.
Now, that is an important consideration. I'm thinking about this because for the 4 years, there was overlap and some of them would graduate and move on, but there was a core group that you see, and they were graduating. And I don't know, since they don't have membership lists for the last 2 years, I don't know whether the membership was as large as they had dwindled somewhat. But I do want to know what happened to them because they just disappeared.
I suspect that meeting where they had so many people, freshman, introduction to the freshman or something, I suspect that was kind of like a rush period for sorority. That they invited freshmen to come to this party and that a lot of those freshmen did not continue with the group.
But some of them did.
That's
I'm sure some of them did.
So I would like to take this moment to make an appeal, which is that we have bulletins and newsletters pretty much from 1985 on. What is up in the attic, unfortunately, is mostly financial records of varying sorts, shapes, and varieties. We did very, very well preserving what bills we paid and saving our canceled checks. But we do not seem to have a cache of older bulletins, of older newsletters, of annual reports. And so if anybody has any of these things in your home, if you would be willing to bring them in and let us photocopy them. Older photos, we have, Marnette just stepped out. I think the photos that we found, Helen, you were working on them also, 60s and beyond. But earlier photographs do not seem to have been saved. So if anyone knows that you've got some of this stuff stored away, you haven't cleaned it all out, please bring it in because it will help us as we try and piece together these stories.
And I also want to tell everybody here about an exciting thing that's happening. I was able, because I'm a history professor at Empire State College, I was able to set up an internship here. And starting, oh my goodness, next week I will be here to set up tasks. I was able to order some materials from Gaylord Archival Supplier, and I have not even seen them yet. I'm coming in on Wednesday. I will be here. We have 2 college students who are going to come here every Wednesday, and I'm going to supervise them, and we're going to start sorting and properly identifying, cataloging, and storing some of our archival documents.
Let's give this woman a hand for getting us.
So I'm excited about that as well. So all those boxes and over here in the attic will be no more, and we are going to have an actual, some manner of church
Yeah, all right.
Get proud of it. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
People know that, Jennifer, people know that.
So before, okay, so first of all, thank you, Anna. And thank you so much for all of the work you've done and the work we're looking forward to. I'd like to point out to you folks that indeed Beth Packus, who is over here, is the conference archivist, and she will be coming back to lecture in September. I think she's one of our lecturers who is coming back, so that's something to look forward to. And there was mention about the church architecture and people that are interested in that. In April, we're having a totally different setup. It's April afternoon, I think it's April 17th, it's in your little program. Bill Rhodes, we will start at the old building on Church Street, what is now the Jewish synagogue. We will start there, and he will talk about the architecture of that building, and then we will walk or drive up here. We will have cars available to take folks who don't want to make the walk, but we'll reconvene here to then talk about the architecture of this building. So it is a lecture in 2 parts on church architecture. And the last thing I'll point out to you is next month we have Lee, another one of our lecturers. Lee is going to lecture on the 7 streams of hymnody. So that will be a, if I am correct, a sing-along lecture.
They'll be singing.
They'll be singing. So we have we have a dozen lectures. Each one is unique and different and exciting. So thank you all for coming. I do hope you're going to come back, come to all of them. This is one of a series of 12. Collect them all. And meanwhile, we have some refreshments that Kathy and Nani arranged for us, and I think Janice brought some stuff. So come have a little bit of snacks, a little after dinner snacks, and coffee or tea. And thank you.
And I will be around for a few minutes, but I have a dinner date, so.